Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am pleased to be with you here in Berlin for these few days and to be able to present today's luncheon keynote address. For this opportunity, I must acknowledge the generosity of the German government and the United Nations Development Program, UNDP, the latter being a major proponent of multidimensional poverty assessment in the Eastern Caribbean region. May I also commend the champions of this cause, the organizers of this meeting, the Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative, OPHI, for their wonderful arrangements both in and out of the meeting rooms. Events such as these are critical at maturing support for this globally important initiative. They help us at the top to get new perspectives of what is going on in much greater clarity, and I wish the MPPN well as it continues to lens in on the status of poverty around the world. The truth is, politicians, if they are well trained and I suspect properly managed, can be great champions. And by the way, Polly, that was intended for you. What struck me yesterday, especially after hearing all the country presentations, was that the MPI stands as a politically neutral tool that transcends ideological divides and is stripped of psychosocial biases. You have achieved something that is very rare, consensus throughout a broad range of countries, many espousing quite contrasting ideologies. You are making us speak a common language. You have given us a coherent vocabulary when it comes to poverty. You deserve our admiration and commendation. Through the help of the UNDP, St. Lucia is championing the development of a sub-regional multidimensional poverty index, MPI. We believe that the MPI will assist in improving and depoliticizing poverty measurement in the Eastern Caribbean. As I speak of my Caribbean country, you may have been thinking of palm trees and sandy beaches with warm water and sunny skies. This idyllic postcard perfect scenery with pina coladas is often the brochure perfect view of the Caribbean that is promoted. And by the way, I'm also marketing so you can come to St. Lucia on vacation. And I must admit that this view is real. In truth, island life can be quite laid back and relaxing. Of course, this image has helped us to create a vibrant tourism sector in the Caribbean. These sunny qualities, combined with breathtaking and panoramic scenery, do afford the Caribbean the opportunity to be a place where good living could be enjoyed. However, this is only one axis, one dimension of the Caribbean reality. Many of you may not immediately associate poverty with the Caribbean. However, the history of the Caribbean was built upon inequality and subjugation. In this post-independence era, progress has been made, but it has not led to a wiping away of poverty. So believe me when I tell you the Caribbean sun shines harder on the poor than on the wealthy. What does poverty in the sunshine look like then? To begin with, its visage is burned in the sun. From working long hours in the fields, it is very rural and finds a home in the countryside. It is uneducated and more female than male. It is a descendant of people who were enslaved and beaten into subjugation not so long ago and whose fate was tied to working on the estate. Its society was built on violence, fear, and absolute injustice. It is still found in pockets in communities which formed on the fringes of the plantations. However, in recent times, due to the weak local economy, poverty has migrated to the capital city in search of work and opportunity. While it may have had access to land in the countryside, it finds landlessness in the urban ghetto. In the city, it also afflicts the educated who cannot find work, as well as increasing numbers of males. The Multidimensional Poverty Index will begin to place some of these descriptions into context. I come from a country that has made significant progress in the reduction of poverty over several decades. I grew up in a poor rural community. My own mother had to sell a cow to pay for my secondary school examination fees. Everyone considered themselves poor. There was an uncomfortable equity in such poverty. Some had more than others, but whatever novelties that existed in one family was shared widely. We have been fortunate in St. Lucia to have achieved many of the Millennium Development Goals ahead of time, and we are committed to pushing along the post-2015 development agenda. Between 1997 and 2006, the government which I led at the time made major investments in alleviating poverty. We introduced universal secondary education access. We established an agency responsible for poverty reduction. We expanded rural electrification to every pocket of the island. We expanded heavily in expanding reliable water supply. We rebuilt many roads that opened up rural communities. The beauty of multidimensional poverty indices is that it can begin to tell us whether these investments worked and where there could have been a better and even more targeted approach. And despite all the investment, our mindset remains that we consider ourselves a poor country relative to most of the world. What some may consider a ghost poverty, a lingering remnant of a former state, is in fact real. It arises also out of acute vulnerability. Caribbean states, because of our smallness and geographic location, albeit between two great continents, live on the edge. We constantly face threats that can easily jeopardize past gains. We are the most disaster-prone region in the world. Countries in the Caribbean have lost several times their GDP in hurricanes and earthquakes. Rebuilding has often come at a hefty price. Along with other small island developing states, we are perhaps the most dependent in the world on imports for food, fuel, and nearly all aspects of living. We experience high homicide rates aggravated by narcotics trafficking, which is itself sustained by acute poverty and inequities. A lot of this leads to a deep sense of insecurity. Feeling insecure is a natural consequence of poverty, and this is caused by real, not imaginary concerns which are not only about income. We must therefore consider the crippling effects of crime, including violent crime, particularly on our young. The fear of living in the most vulnerable and miasma-ridden places on steep hillsides and near polluted areas, because there is no other choice. The fear of the little that one possesses being expropriated by larger, more powerful players, and the injustice of having no real redress due to ineffective and even corrupt legal systems. This poverty of fear is perhaps why renowned reggae Jamaican singer Bob Marley extolled the need to emancipate yourself from mental slavery. None but yourselves can free our minds. Fear can keep back an entire nation. It is a poverty that says you will remain poor and dependent no matter your successes. It is a poverty of dejection and self-doubt, of believing that one must remain on the dole to survive. Any redemption song cannot be sung if we do not define what we are being redeemed from. While this caucus has gathered to discuss matters relevant to the measurement of severe poverty, I think there may well be general acceptance that poverty has both tangible and intangible attributes. Therefore, understanding the causes of poverty is central to proposing any meaningful solutions. It is this blur between physical attributes and psychosocial ones which make poverty so difficult to measure. It is this complexity which has spawned a movement to change the measurement of poverty beyond merely dollars and cents, and to consider the dearth of other human tangibles so essential to a sustainable livelihood. Poverty is clearly not just an absence of physical assets. It is also the absence of scarcity, of ability, of access. For some, deprivation of the mind is arguably worse than deprivation at the dinner table. We can say within the models for multidimensional poverty that education is a lifelong asset, an asset of immeasurable value. A multidimensional understanding of poverty also affirms that health matters to wealth and well-being, that healthy people are best able to live prosperous, enriching, and quality lives. We know that education and health are not only important as contributors and prerequisites for economic pursuits, but these social goods also have immense intrinsic value. They ensure that people can live within their communities and in countries as good citizens, contributing to society even for no return. These are aspects we could never be captured effectively by looking only at physical possessions, income, and consumption. From religion to politics, the poor are espoused as an important constituency the world over. Whether these efforts are sincere or not, everyone wants to be seen to be helping the poor the Malay way, as we say in St. Lucia. However, actions on poverty still remain largely about handing over the fish rather than empowering the new fisher. Moreover, in many countries, the dialogue on tackling acute poverty is nearly non-existent as the middle class grows, becomes more powerful, and demands the most attention. Also, I know the important statistic provided by OFI that over 70% of people who are considered MPI poor live in countries that are considered middle income. We cannot ignore the politics of poverty. While poverty is strongly influenced by geographic disparities and physical isolation, it is also the deprivation of political power and accountability. If there is not a redistribution of power and decision-making, then those who have accumulated wealth through the poverty of others will continue to ensure its persistence. Sometimes these forces of poverty lie within a country itself, and they seek to maintain a status quo that is anti-poor, even if their words and actions are espoused in the name of the poor. And may I add, how many of us politicians are so guilty? In St. Lucia, we have come to this reality out of necessity. The burden or cost of poverty on government has increased unchecked. So much was done in the name of poor people. This creates a disposition in some countries where some who are not acutely poor still demand protection that is undeserving, unnecessary, and which in fact leads to dependency. Perhaps I can share some experiences even as we learn from you, and have learned so much simply by sharing your company. For many years, the government of St. Lucia provided a number of widespread subsidies for the entire country. Sugar, flour, and rice, all imported foodstuffs, were purchased by the state, then retailed to the public at large at artificially created low prices. This was done for decades. All, rich and poor, purchased these items at the same prices. The health consequences of these policies were generally ignored. By selling sugar at subsidized prices, we encouraged sugar consumption. It is little wonder that St. Lucia was estimated to have one of the highest rates of diabetes in the world. It is said that we lead diabetes on a per capita basis. Clearly, those policies were misguided because the reality is that the wealthier benefit more as they consume more. My government is therefore very eager to find an effective means of social protection that is targeted and differentiated to suit the multidimensional needs of individuals. Here, an MPI that is regionally accepted becomes a reliable tool for measuring who needs what. St. Lucia's chief statistician, Mr. Edwin St. Catherine, whom some of you know very well, has been championing the development of an Eastern Caribbean level MPI. This index uses data sets from recent labor force and living standards surveys. It proposes 4 dimensions of education, employment, child welfare, and standards of living, and these are measured using 8 indicators. While this address would not permit me to provide very much detail, I wish to flag one important indicator that was included, that of internet access. Like the distinguished Vice President from the Dominican Republic, I flag this because connectivity is an essential access enabler to fighting poverty. It enhances access to information. It allows individuals to communicate at reasonable cost. It can facilitate so many opportunities that would not normally exist because of isolation within a country and with the outside world. We cannot emphasize enough the opportunities that are created by information and communications technologies in leveling access and opportunity. It is a fundamental equalizer if it is well used and embraced. And its beauty, the average child in a rural environment in St. Lucia would get access to the same information that the child in the school in Berlin will get access to, and in Toronto or in New York or in London. That is its beauty. That is why I describe it as a great equalizer. Our government believes that access to telecommunication services has to be affordable. We also believe that government must ensure that ICT services are not only available in the capital city, but more importantly, all around the country, in the homes of those who need to be liberated from poverty. And James, I'm getting there, so don't get too restive. Without a doubt, we accept the words of the wise Dr. Matthias Sen that human lives are battered and diminished in all kinds of different ways. However, we must also accept that sometimes the battering is deliberate and the diminishing is caused by those without care or consideration. A fairer world will mean more people lifted out of poverty and deprivation. The hard work being championed by OFI and ably supported by partners such as GIZ and UNDP in defining the multidimensional nature of poverty will only help in this case for a fairer, more just, and balanced world. I endorse your efforts, not solely from an academic perspective, but because I sincerely believe that the MPI has practical applications for making a major difference in poverty policy throughout the world. For us to redefine a strategy of redemption, we must be real about the cost of delivery of poverty alleviating measures. For instance, the cost of producing electricity in a country like St. Lucia or putting food on the table will always be more costly because of the cost of importation. It is one thing to shape policy on poverty, but a different thing to administer or implement it. For that reason, we cannot ignore how best policy is to be implemented. Our poor do not need layers of bureaucracy and costly administrative arrangements. For that reason, those charged with delivering services to the poor or otherwise implementing programs of poverty alleviation or reduction need to believe passionately in their mission. No one should profit off the poor, even as they claim to alleviate it. The words of the redemption song I quoted earlier from Bob Marley was itself a recast of an earlier speech given in Canada in 1937 by the black activist Marcus Mosiah Garvey. He said this: "We are going to emancipate ourselves from mental slavery because whilst others might free the body, none but ourselves can free the mind. Your mind is your only ruler, sovereign. The man who is not able to develop and use his mind is bound to be the slave of the other man who uses his mind." Unquote. Eliminating poverty means liberating people from the flatness of their current horizon. It also means making them free to think, dream, and access new opportunities. Our efforts to eliminate poverty cannot just focus on age-old poverty. In some countries, we must now contend with what I consider to be the new poverty, unleashed by dramatic changes in trading regimes, and of course, the economic adjustments compelled by the global financial crisis. Thousands have lost their livelihoods and thrown into the ranks of the poor. This new poor will be harder to manage because they have had the taste of a different life. As St. Lucia, the Caribbean, and the world look towards 2015 and the world we want beyond, let us all recommit ourselves a world that shares better for the good of all. Thank you, OFI, UNDP, GIZ, for all your efforts in this regard. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you and now invite you to a good lunch.